All right. Awesome. I'm going to let people join because, it's right at 7. So proper. So proper. I'm going to give people a few minutes to join. So one thing I did not mention that I forgot to mention to you, Lenore, is I feel like I want to call you Miss Black.
I know, right? You can call me anything.
I'm kind of liking that. Is that when we're on Periscope, like it's funny because you want to like talk to me through here, but if you feel like turning a little, that might be a little better. Yeah. Okay.
Like talk show style?
Yeah, talk show style, where you're looking in, but kind of, back and forth. All right. That's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to do our little introduction. So, hello, Instagram Live people. Hello, Periscope. Welcome to the La Maison de Rouge weekly Monday Periscope show. We broadcast live every Monday at 7 p.m. in New York City, and I am Lucy Sweetkill, a professional dominatrix and one half of the La Maison de Rouge duo. And today we have a very special guest, Miss Black. Because she's a really good friend of mine as well. And I'll let you kind of go through your introduction and introduce who you are and all of that.
Awesome.
Okay. So first, introductions, we definitely like if you can say your name, your pronoun, as well as any work titles, what you do, and any self-identified titles as well.
Awesome. So my name's Lenore Black. I'm a sex witch, erotic mentor, writer, and coach living in Brooklyn. Currently, I work with clients to bring sacred sexuality and mindfulness into their sexual practices, usually through erotic, ritual eroticism, conscious kink, and sex magic and witchcraft.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, and I'm also she, her pronouns. I was like, wait, I forgot something.
Sex witch. And I think we actually interviewed maybe one or two people who identify as sex witch as well, so we'll kind of get into what that means to you.
Yeah.
So, okay, how long have you been doing this? How long?
So the current incarnation of what I'm doing has only been within the past few years, but really it's taking the knowledge that I've gathered through everything that I've done my entire life. Once we get into my kink background, it's like I started masturbating at the age of 4, so it feels like sexuality has been like my entire life.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. So this version right now, you've been doing it for the last few years.
Yeah.
And so how did that all come about?
So it's definitely been a big evolution for me. Sexuality's definitely been a journey full of a lot of ups and downs for me personally. And actually one thing that I really always like to talk about too is that sexual empowerment means something different to everyone. Yeah. So for me, I identified as like a former sex addict, had sexual impulses, which now there's kind of some stuff where they like don't like to use the term sex addiction, but for me, I still use it personally because it feels better to my experience, my lived experience, I guess. But there's definitely some controversy around that.
Is it something? Do you use that term because it's something you feel like you overcame? Because most people use the word addiction because they're overcoming.
Yes.
Something.
Yeah, and it was definitely for me. It was about the danger of it as well. So I feel like some critiques I've heard about using sex addiction as an identifier is that, like it's a way for kind of cis white males to get away with bad behavior and just label it as an addiction, which I think can definitely happen. But for me, it was more about like dangerous and impulsive sexual behavior that like destroyed my life, destroyed my family's, destroyed, like it was very, to me it was almost just as dangerous as a drug addiction. And it felt just as impulsive at a certain point. And Yeah, so that's kind of why I still am I still am a sex addict. I love sex, and my entire life is about sex. So I kind of, in some ways, feel like I was able to overcome it by making my entire life about sex and being able to really like accept that as a part of my identity and not have to constantly repress it or put it in a box and try to hide it, try to pretend like I was a different person.
I feel like you made it a healthy, you had a healthier avenue of expressing your sexuality instead of participating in what used to be very dangerous and behavior that would be destructive.
Yeah.
You sort of now started to channel your sexuality and your love of sex and your love of, kinky and really thrilling things in a more healthy avenue.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that really ties into the mindfulness aspect for me, which isn't, like I said, it looks different for everybody. For some people, sexual empowerment is like buying their first vibrator. And for me, it was like I had so many sexual partners growing up, and I had been such an intense sexual person that at a certain point, like, sexual empowerment was not my form of sexual empowerment. It was really kind of bringing me down in a lot of ways.
Yeah, expressing your sexuality was actually not your sexual empowerment because you didn't have that issue. Yeah. Expressing it wasn't the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
It was kind of controlling it.
Yes, exactly.
And that's really interesting because I think in this sort of current time, we've all been talking about sex positivity and sexual empowerment, and it's really revolved around people communicating and opening up to different expressions of their sexuality. And you're like, well, that's not...
I'm like, how do I bring it back in?
Yeah, the problem is you were just kind of letting it all out without a purpose.
Yeah.
And sort of, it was... hurting you.
Yeah.
And affecting your relationships and being destructive.
Yeah.
I think that's the big difference with things people are into in BDSM and kink, right? You can totally have a panty fetish, but if you're like, going into people's laundry and stealing their panty fetish, that's not okay.
It's kind of a problem.
Yeah, compared to like seeing someone and letting them know you have a panty fetish and they get to consent with you, maybe playing a role play of stealing their panties.
Yeah, exactly. There's a good way to go about it.
So I want to know, like, why, some of your sexual journey then to kind of get you to this place where you feel like you've gotten more purpose with your sexuality.
Yeah, so I've had a very rich sexual past. So I started masturbating at the age of 4. So therefore it was like, it's almost one of my earliest childhood memories.
Wow.
And
do you remember, can I ask you,
how,
like, in what capacity?
So one of my friends showed me how to do it, and she was a girlfriend, so we were the same age. Like, it didn't feel predatory or weird. It just felt like experimental, and I was like, whoa, this is the coolest thing in the world. And I was able to have like full orgasms. Wow. And
because at that age, it is the doctor age where they're kind of like poking around.
Yeah.
And where they start to like look at their own bodies like, what's this?
Yeah.
What's that?
So that definitely is my biggest fetish because specifically from that like young experimentation with my girlfriends. They were always like, oh, let's play doctor. And so I was like, then I became the doctor, and I was like, hey, everybody, let's play doctor. It was so bad. It was like my slumber parties were obviously the most fun because I was like, everybody, let's get naked and like explore each other's bodies. And like,
wow.
I was like, had more pussy in my life at 6 years old than like most 15-year-old boys would dream of.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I was very, my attraction to women was very young as well. Like, I was very curious about female bodies. Oh yeah, and this is, so my first sexual fantasy, because it's like, at that age, you're not even attached to any form of sexuality at that point. You're just kind of like, hey, I'm touching my body, it feels good, like, how am I, but I realized there was this kind of like rise and fall to it. So my first sexual fantasy was, I would imagine a volcano And the volcano would get like hotter and hotter and hotter, and then when it erupted, then I was able to have an orgasm.
Wow, I love how that was your visualization.
Yeah.
But I can relate to that because one of my first like masturbating, because I masturbated at a really young age too, was the faucet in the bathtub.
Oh yes.
Yeah, and I didn't think anything of it, and I think I just imagined like really heavy running water as well as running the water, and like that was like the thing that was like...
Yeah, it's cool that they were both like natural occurring things too.
Yeah.
It's like running water, volcanoes, very, very organic fantasies.
Is that what we call an organic?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you started masturbating, finding doctor, and then where did things go from there?
From there, so my first actual kinky thought didn't come until a little bit later. I was probably around 7 or 8 at this time, and there's this song, I can't remember who sings it, but it's the 90s song Torn. And
Natalie Imbruglia.
Yes, I knew that. So she, in this song...
Fair love
there. In this song, I actually misheard the lyrics. Shout out to my friend Bobby for correcting me, which was even funnier. So in the song, she says, and I misheard it. I heard it as, I'm cold and I am chained lying naked on the floor. So I thought of a woman like naked and cold and chained in a basement. And I got really turned on. I was like, am I a serial killer? Like, what does this mean?
I feel like no one has ever said that about a Natalie Imbruglia song. And I hope wherever she is, because I think she was like a one-hit wonder and doesn't exist anymore, that somehow this gets sent to her.
Yes, it gets back to her.
Anything can be kinky.
Yep.
Anything.
So after that, it kind of, from there, I was definitely like a very sexual person. I was very curious. I loved interior design, so I'd like set the Barbie house up to be perfect and then like just make all my Barbies fuck. And that was pretty much all I did. It was like definitely an obsession at that age, but definitely what I like to note is, because I've also encountered significant trauma sexual trauma between the ages of like 9 to 12, that I was a kinky and sexual person before that as well. Because I feel like there's definitely that stereotype of like, oh, well, you were molested when you were younger, like of course you're kinky. You know, it's just like, I was definitely kinky before any of that happened.
Yeah. It is interesting when, you know, those stereotypes that happen, because I mean, yes, it's true. There are people who due to their trauma that has affected them, their sexuality has changed. It's altered in some capacity, and you know, and you don't really know if it would have been that way without that sort of you know, nature nurture type of thing. But there are a lot of people who use kink and BDSM as a way to heal that trauma. Yeah. You know, because the reality is you can't go back in time and you can't change it. Yep. And yes, would we all rather children never experience any form, or anyone experience any form of sexual assault or trauma? But it does happen, and like you can either just feel shame about it, or you can really like embrace your sexuality and, you know, and find positive avenues for it. And that definitely was a huge part of my journey as well, was and it didn't come until much later. I wish it would have came sooner, but so in my teenage years I was definitely probably like every parent's worst nightmare. After that, I had like, at this point I had a huge amount of sexual literacy. Like I had essentially done everything by the age of 12 and like loved it. So at that point you're just kind of like, all right, well, I'm gonna fuck everybody. And so that's what I did. And so it was definitely kind of it wasn't the greatest time in my life. I definitely had a lot of ups and downs through that, but kind of like working through it, and it definitely kind of came and went too. It was like I had these moments where I was like, oh, I want to be normal. Like I always just wanted to be
vanilla and always felt like this was like this like terrible thing that I didn't want to be a part of, that I didn't wish it upon myself, and so I was always trying to repress it and hide it, and the more that I did that, the more it would come out in dangerous ways. And so at like the peak of my sex addiction, and this was like unbeknownst to most of my friends and boyfriends and family members, I was essentially like meeting up with men that I didn't know off of Craigslist and having sex with them at their houses. I didn't know who they were. I didn't care who they were. And like the fact that they could kill me made it like even more thrilling. And it just kind of hit a point eventually where it just felt even more empty than it had before. And I had, you know, ruined some relationships in my family. I had ruined every boyfriend relationship, partnership I had. Because I would always, again, try to push it in this little box and pretend it was kind of like my dirty little secret. But it would always end up coming out no matter what. And so it wasn't until a particularly bad bout, it would kind of come and go over the years, but particularly bad bout of it, I got the opportunity to move to California, and it was for a guy, and like it didn't work out, and it was whatever, but it was kind of the first time in my life where I met another truly kinky person that had also been through trauma and was now working with sexuality in this more mindful kind of way. And so that was about the time where some different fetishes started to emerge. So it was like, up until this point, or how I identified kink-wise in my teenage years was mostly like primal. I wasn't ever super sadistic, or I definitely tried everything though. Like I was like, oh, I'll try to be a sadist, I'll try to be a masochist, like let's get bruises all over my body. And then I was like, maybe that's not my thing. And so I was like, and especially as far as like, you know, speaking of women cold chained and naked on the floor, like most of my early porn experiences were like lesbian torture porn, which I felt pretty bad about. And it was just like, and also something that I always like to say too is that it's like we watch these fucked up porn, you know, right? We watch some fucked up things online, we get aroused, and we create this whole story about ourselves because of it. Like, oh, well, because I like lesbian torture porn, therefore I must be a female serial killer that is a danger to the world. Like, oh, I'm a terrible person. But, like, none of these fantasies I've ever really wanted to act out in real life. And I've had the opportunity for people that are like, yeah, you know, I'll bottom for you, like, beat the shit out of me. And it just, like, never is really my thing. So I definitely, over the years, have realized that most of my kinks are mental versus physical. So yeah, whereas it's like as a dominatrix, it's like you enjoy inflicting pain upon people. I like the taboo nature of someone inflicting pain on somebody else, but I don't really have the desire to act upon it or do it.
Well, that's a smart thing that you've realized your fantasy and reality.
Yeah.
Right? And that's something that a lot of people don't understand is, again, fantasy versus reality, and that you have to sort of maybe play a little bit with taking some fantasies into reality. Not all the way, but just a little bit, just to see if you even might like it. And then try to figure out, do I maybe just like the fantasy?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, or just for me, it's like the taboo. And it's like, and especially as someone who has, you know, tried everything, it was like, past a certain point, the only things that really get me off are pretty fucked up scenarios. But it's like, do I really have to do that? No. Usually I can accomplish it, like, very well through role play, and I feel like I kind of, like, embody it, work through it, and I'm like, cool, I feel good. Like, but it's taken me a while to get to that point, so it's not like everybody can just, like, jump on and start doing it, but,
what do you think helped you get to that point?
Oh, yeah, so, actually, what helped me get to that point was kind of my first curated scene, like, specifically for my own healing. And it didn't happen like that right off the bat, but, it was with an ex-partner, and I had kind of, he understood what I had gone through, which was also really rare as well. It's like sometimes I feel like in sex we can feel so isolated, and because people aren't talking about it, we don't have the community around it. So I'm in my bubble thinking that I'm the only person this has ever happened to and everything is terrible, but it's like, but there's other people that get it and can see you for who you really are. And so I was able to be seen for who I really was, and at this time I was in a major daddy phase. I still am, but it's not like quite as intense, but it's interesting because my kinks kind of shift over my life based off of like what I need for my personal development, I guess. So I definitely needed a dad.
Yeah.
And I needed someone to be like, hey, you can't fucking do this. Like, stop acting this way. Like, if you're gonna have sex with someone, use a condom. Like, I had never had someone like...
You needed the discipline.
Yeah, I needed the discipline.
And the structure.
Yeah. And even though I was 24 years old, I was still like a bratty teenager that was like, I'm gonna do whatever I want. And so it was nice because it was like, in this scene, so because of my trauma, I was abused by men that were not directly family members. Yeah. They were close, they had access to me, they were close to our family, but they weren't directly related to me. Therefore, that's where my incest fantasy kind of came about, it's kind of my way of rewriting the story of my trauma and being able to take control of the narrative. So for me, the incest thing didn't really come about until the last few years, and it's kind of me rewriting what had happened to me, and because it's like, I guess in my brain, I'm like, oh, well, it wasn't someone from my family, so now I can like, pretend it's someone from my family and kind of like reenact this scenario. And I've worked with a lot of clients that also are turned on by aspects of their trauma, and it's really hard for people because there's this horrible thing that happened to you, and the fact that there's a part of it that you could eroticize later on, and our brains are complicated.
It's also coping, our body and minds are trying to cope with this thing that happened, and it doesn't make you a bad person to eroticize it. Yeah. And like you were saying about like your daddy stuff, you may play it out and go about it and figure every part around it to the point where it may not have an appeal anymore to you.
Yeah, because it's almost like just part of my journey at that point. And it was like, I just needed it, and it's kind of like, and there's still times where I'll go back to it, but it's not as intense as it was. Where before it was like 24/7, like, I'm your small daughter dynamic, whereas like, now it kind of comes and goes a little bit more, like...
And it's evolved as you've wrapped your head around that fantasy and not like feeling ashamed by it and not, worrying about what it meant.
Yeah.
For those of you asking questions, can you wait to the end of the broadcast? We'll have a Q&A just so that we can kind of go through, all the other questions. Please write them down, and then during the Q&A you can ask them. So, you had your ex-partner help you play out sort of something in your past.
Yep. And it was nice because at that point it was like, once I had met someone who I felt like understood me, and also I guess it's probably worth mentioning that at this time, like, my sex addiction had evolved into like, I just ran out of thrilling things to do eventually, and so I started sleeping with men for money, which I hesitate to call myself a sex worker in this context because it wasn't like an organized form of work. It wasn't like, I would get so drunk most of the time I would forget to take the money. It wasn't even really about that at that point. It was just like the thrill,
the taboo-ness.
Yeah, the taboo. It was just like the last thing I hadn't really done at that point, and so it was like, so he helped me get into Tantric massage, which that was so. With kind of like working through the kinky stuff and the fantasies, and so I was kind of healing on that level. Then I started doing tantric sensual massage as sex work, and that was also incredibly healing for me. I had never I had never exercised boundaries with a partner ever. Like, I had never told someone that something didn't feel good. I never told, and I almost lacked the vocabulary to even do it. And through sensual massage, I was able to say, hey, it kind of feels weird if you touch me there. Like, hey, you're touching my boob too hard. It was very like I was able to develop the vocabulary and the language to be able to even like stick up for myself and have these boundaries. And so it was kind of all these things. Also, California is just a really healing place in general. I was like getting acupuncture every week, massages. It took me like 3 years of really focusing on myself. I took EMDR therapy, which I totally recommend for anybody with PTSD. And it was just really a really powerful time for me to heal through all of that. And so the tantric massage was great because then it kind of brought in a more spiritual element. So I guess it's also worth mentioning that I've identified as a witch since I was 13. And it was awesome because my mom thought it was like a cute little hobby and that it was like funny, so she like let me buy all this stuff and like let me read all the books, which was really awesome. Thanks, Mom. And what was great about Wicca and witchcraft at the time was that it is like a fertility, earth-based religion. They don't punish sex. I definitely had this like Jesus complex when I was younger. They don't punish you for that. They're totally open about everything you want to do when it comes to that. But even growing up, it was like I was still, even though I knew in my mind that it was okay as far as like my spirituality was concerned, I still felt them very separately. They were very separate parts of my life. And it almost kind of reminds me of many Christians that like will, go to church and like do the thing and be nice people and then go home and like do whatever the fuck they want. And it was kind of like that. Like they were still very separate entities in my life, like bringing spirituality and sacred sexuality together with sex and magic together. It was something that I didn't really start doing until the past few years, and I wish I would have done it much sooner.
Well, you had to go through that to realize that they were related.
Yeah.
You have this, Wiccans, and if you want to, some people call it religion, some people call it, but it celebrates femininity, it celebrates nature and women and the body, and it doesn't fear from that. It's not about like cover up your whole stuff. Nobody wants to see your nipples or anything like that. And so that ties into really understanding your sexuality and being very embracing of your sexuality. And it's funny because what you said about sex work is, I've heard that a lot, that there are a lot of people, once they choose to do sex work, and again, this is not about sex trafficking or anybody forced into that type of work. That for us is sex trafficking. It is not sex work. For those who choose to go into sex work, they actually learn how to vocalize their boundaries and do more self-care and self-reflection than they ever have in other parts of their life. And at least that was, and I've heard that multiple times from many sex workers, and that's definitely ranged true with me, because I would get into very bad sexual experiences because I didn't have any boundaries. And for me, I use sex as a form of showing that somebody loved me. And so I would kind of do whatever, or use it as a form of like, oh, well, don't be mad at me, here's this. I would just give it away in that way of like, well, if they're having sex with me, it's because they care. And if they're upset at me, I'll have sex with them. Or if, like I would do a lot of those things, even if I didn't want to have sex, like, oh, to feel love, I would have sex with someone. And so I was doing a lot of things to feel loved because I didn't understand, for me, what that was. I just understand that sex was like power in some capacity. And, sex in my mind was, through the very not good education. No education of sex. Like, I just related well, you know, if you want someone to love you, then you have to. And in this case, this was, you know, heterosexual, like, relationships of, like, I have to give that away to somebody. You know, I have to, you know, in my mind, that's what I was seeing, something that, you know, I had to use in some form. Yeah. And so boundaries and learning how to communicate boundaries and knowing my boundaries all came through sex work.
Yeah, and also knowing your value as well. Like, that was very huge for me. Your value. I had definitely really, I feel like I used sex as a form of punishment and self-harm for a very long time.
I did that too.
Yeah, and it's just like, and it wasn't, like, for me, I thought, and I definitely, speaking of sex education, I'd pretty much gotten most of my sex ed from porn. Therefore, it's like, you know, it's a performance, a performance for you, the viewer, but also a performance for the male, usually, that's in the scene. And so, I mean, I would blow people's minds during sex, but I would walk away empty and unsatisfied. I didn't know what pleasure was. Like, I never lost my orgasmic, like, my masturbation style. Like, I could always at least get myself off, but as far as, like, getting off,
it's like disconnected.
Yeah, it was totally disconnected. And also, again, like, compartmentalized, like, the spirituality, the sex, it was like pleasure and orgasms were over here, and then sex was over here, and that was like, power and punishment. And it was just this very, like, everything was kind of in these different contexts. And I actually remember my first boyfriend, bless him, we had been dating for like 2 years, and he bought me my first vibrator. He was super cool, great dude, and I had to tell him, was like, hey, every orgasm I've ever had with you, I faked. And how can we, like, rectify? Like, how can we move forward from here and, like, actually try to do something? And he was, like I said, he was a really good sport about it.
He should be.
Exactly. His ego was definitely a little bruised, but it was, like, kind of setting that precedent of, like, I'm not going to fake orgasms anymore, was a really strong, powerful thing for me. But I realized, like, the terror of having to tell your partner something like that. Like,
yeah, and it's crazy that women feel that terror, right?
Yeah.
To say that I am not having an orgasm, like, it actually brings women fear to say that.
Yeah.
And that's a society we live in, where it's like, if a man doesn't come, he's just like, well, I'm not there yet. You know? And it's like,
oh, I'm stressed out. Yeah.
You know, while if a woman does, it's like such an afterthought. Like, it's an afterthought, and like shifting that. I think we're seeing a shift. We're seeing more people not faking it and asking for what they want, or, you know, and their partner's asking for what their partner wants and needs. Because that can be really exhausting too.
Yeah.
But if you're always being like, I need you to do this, I need you to be like, you want your partner to be like, what can I do for you?
Yeah, exactly.
How can I make you have an orgasm? That's what being a good partner is about too, is saying, how can I help you have an orgasm, instead of like always having to be like, can you give me an orgasm?
Yeah, exactly. Without having to ask for it. Like, hey, what about me?
Yeah, like that doesn't feel good either.
Yeah.
So then you kind of like, through all those experiences, and obviously in California, I feel like being in an environment that really supports and supports spirituality and, you know, self-realization and, you know, expression and sexual expression, it helped you kind of open up all those compartments to be like, how do I put these all together and let's sort this out?
Yep, right? Exactly. And it almost kind of like happened as this like aha moment all of a sudden, where I was like thinking about like my journey and how I was able to heal myself through all of this. And that's what's cool about it, is that it's like I was able to do all of this on my own. Therefore, it's like, if I can do it, anyone can do it. And circumstances are definitely important, but I believe that we all have the power to really be able to kind of shape our narrative, especially with sexuality, in the way that we want to. And I also feel really called to this work right now with the Me Too movement and everything that's happening. It's kind of like we ripped open these wounds of trauma collectively, and it's kind of like that doesn't really heal anything. Like kind of what we were talking about earlier, where you're like, you either you accept that it happened and you try to heal yourself by moving through it. Yeah. And it's like when you kind of bring up these old wounds and you leave them like open and fresh and exposed to the world, like you're going to be triggered. You're going to start having really troubling sexual situations. Even in real life, you can be having really troubling situations. It's so I definitely feel like the idea of using BDSM, fantasy, sex, magic, witchcraft, all of that to really kind of work through a lot of that shame and pain that we all carry around is like really needed right now.
I agree. You can't just like drudge up all the stuff. Yeah. Because yes, you do need to like unclog that shit. Yep. But then you need to like work at fixing it. Yeah. And how do we go about that instead of like pull it all out and just be angry and upset and hurt? I feel like that we need to move through and find a better place. Yeah. And I think we all have the capabilities of definitely healing ourselves in some capacity, even if you have some sort of mental illness, like, making sure that you get the support, whether that's through therapy, whether that's through medicine, a combination of both. And like, of course, it definitely helps if society will support us in that, because our society unfortunately hasn't been supportive of people coming out about their mental illness and trying to get the support they need, whether that's like even just insurance money to cover a lot of their like insurance doesn't really even cover therapy and some of these drugs and stuff like that you need. And if we focused on like those types of healing that we do on other types of like actual like physical healing, like I think we would go a lot further as a society. Yeah,
like one example was like I would always kind of get in my head about like not being able to squirt, because it's like such a like porny popular thing right now. Everyone's like, oh, can you squirt? I want to make you squirt. I'm like, it's not gonna happen. But there has actually been 2 times where it has happened. It's more of a gush, it's not like a geyser, but whatever brand you have is fine. There have been twice, it's happened before twice. Both times I was not ready for it. I was not expecting it, and as soon as it happened, I started bawling uncontrollably. It was like, wow. It was like it had loosened up some shit in there. It was like, and I definitely believe that our body carries around a lot of trauma, and for me it's like in my stomach and in my pelvis, and like a little bit up here, but like definitely down here. And yeah, it was like and I was lucky enough both times that it did happen that I was with people that understood kind of my history and where I was coming from, and didn't like totally freak out and be like, oh my god, she's crying, why is this happening?
That they were trying to be supportive.
Yeah, they were very, very supportive, and it was just kind of like, and afterwards I was just like, whoa, I was not expecting that. I had no idea that was going to happen, but it felt really good to be able to kind of release some stuff in that way.
Yeah. So let's go back to, I just want some pure answers to these questions of, obviously you identify as being kinky. That's an identifier for you. Would you also say you have certain fetishes?
Oh yeah, okay, so this is fun. So
what are your kinks and
I thank FetLife for my kinky, like I had identified as a kinky person but hadn't really found the words. It also didn't have the vocabulary for it. And I stumbled on FetLife, and I was like, what the fuck is this website? This is amazing. It's like, right away, it was like posting pictures of my asshole everywhere, like, was like, oh, this is my identifier, like, joined every group, like.
Your asshole totally, is your identifier.
Yes, that is my identifier. I, like, fucking loved it. I was like, oh my god, this is Like, this is this website I've been waiting my whole life for. And so FetLife definitely gave me a lot of the vocabulary and language around being kinky. And it was also like, and this was even way before 50 Shades of Grey, so it was like, I had this very vague idea of what I thought kink was. And it was like leather, whips, chains, like those like very brief dominatrix types things that you see. And I was like, I knew that I wasn't normal, but I didn't necessarily identify with that either. And so FetLife was great because it kind of opened me up to this idea of like, oh, are you like a top, a bottom, a switch, a this, a that? And so for a while I was like, I was like, okay, I'm definitely a switch because I usually am more of a top in sexual situations, and I do enjoy bottoming here and there, but it has to be like, but I definitely can top from the bottom. I'm like one of those people. I'll like tell you how to top me the whole time.
You're doing it wrong.
Exactly. I'm like, no, more of this. Make it hurt a little bit more. Like,
don't be a bitch.
But even as a switch, it's kind of like identifying as bisexual. It's like, well, you're saying you're only into men or you're only into women. Like, what about everybody else? And so for me, it was kind of like that with identifying as a switch. So really, I mostly identify as like fluid kinky as far as my roles, as far as what I'm into. It changes, not all the time, but like I said, it kind of, every couple of years I find myself into something like new and different, and I'm kind of like, maybe I like saw parts of it coming before, but I was just like, oh, this is new, okay. And so yeah, FetLife was great for that, and I was able to like really be, and actually that was also another very important part of my sexual empowerment journey, is I had just written a really badass bio on there that I was like, it was the first space in my life where I could just truly be myself and truly be seen for myself. And I was like,
That's really awesome.
I'm a witch, I like watching women cry, I like this, I like that, and it was just like, dun, 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 and people were like, whoa, who are you?
I like watching women cry.
I do. So through there, I kind of started circling back around to more of my childhood fantasies. So we kind of like mentioned playing doctor earlier. That was and probably still is my biggest fantasy. And I feel like a lot of people, I work a lot with co-erotic themes. So it's like most of the things that you're turned on by did happen early in childhood. And the emotions that are attached to it can definitely like play a huge part in it as well. And so for me, the doctor thing was actually one of the like very consensual sexual experimentation styles that I had done when I was a kid, so I didn't have any negative connotations with it. I would freak out with excitement every time I went to the gynecologist, like to the point where I would like lie and say that I would go every 6 months, and they'd be like, you only have to come like once a year, and I'm like, no, something's wrong, like I just need you guys to like get up in there and like just check everything again, like just to make sure. And they're like, what? Like,
they're like, you've been here for 3 hours, lady.
And so it was just this like,
no, just keep going deeper.
Exactly. I was like, there's something in there. I know it. And so now it's like the medical fetish has definitely, I would say that's my biggest, as far as like fetish and things that are like my quickest paths to arousal, like what will get me off the fastest. My partner picks on me all the time because we just watch such wildly different porn, to where it's like when we're like trying to have a night in, we're like, ooh, let's watch porn together, and I'm like, all right, let's bring up some very realistic gynecological medical play porn. He's like, what? He's like, this is not sexy. And I'm like, what? And like, for me, it has to be.
They're like, step one.
Yeah.
It's actually the video you would show medical students who are going through a program.
It has to be like as realistic as possible. Like, if the doctor's like, oh, looks like you need a dick, I'm like, nope, gotta change it. It's not good enough. Like, it has to be
not working for me.
Totally realistic. Like, just like you're a woman going to the gynecologist.
It's so crazy though, because I actually have a few people I see where they want very realistic doctor exams. And I do very realistic exams. I actually have a lab coat that, is, you have to specially order with my name on it and like go through everything. And I actually have a school check form, like a health check form.
I
like
love
that
it.
was printed out from the school.
Like, I need to get one of those.
So it's actually the whole form that says like, it goes through like any surgeries or any injuries in school that you've had, and how's your all these sexual things. It's like a really
that's awesome. It's very comprehensive.
It's super comprehensive. It's like 4 pages.
Oh my god, amazing. Yeah, and then as far as like,
I'll let you borrow it.
From that, I know, I'm like, damn, I'll hit you up for that one. And then besides the medical play fetish, that's probably my biggest. And then from there, I just like really taboo stuff. So the incest is definitely one that's like very taboo, and I like it's like funny to me at this point. Obviously, I don't like never recommend doing it in real life. I don't support it. It's very traumatizing for people, but it's kind of funny because sometimes people will act like, I'll be like, oh, I'm an erotic coach, and they're like, oh, well, what are you into? I'm like, incest. They're like, what? Like, it's like, so I definitely realized that that's a pretty intense thing.
I know a lot of people into it.
Yeah, I know, it's been becoming more of a thing. I feel like people are talking about it.
It's a huge thing now with the stepbrother, stepsister thing on porn.
Yep.
So,
yep. And then I also have a huge breeding fetish, which is my bad feminist fetish. That's like this idea, because I don't want kids.
What's taboo with your feminism?
Yes, exactly. It's like the idea that like a man can just put his seed inside of me, and I'm like forced to have this child in this like dystopian Handmaid's Tale kind of world. I'm like, oh, that's so horrifying.
You know how many people I've talked to who've watched Handmaid's Tale, and they're like, I kind of masturbated to it. And I was just like, of course you did.
Exactly.
Of course you did.
It's like, we have so much freedom as women now, and it's just like, that would be the one thing that like really fucks you up for the next 20 years of your life, that you like have this thing that you have to take care of.
She does not want that actually happening.
Yes, exactly.
Without her consent.
Exactly. It's, again, mental fantasy.
Versus reality. Yes. Fantasy versus reality. Alright, so then there's those. Any other ones?
I also like putting it in straight guys' butts. That's my but I'm like, it's not even kinky anymore. It's like, it's not.
I'm way into that.
Yeah.
I'm into popping cherries of all kinds.
Yes.
So even when I was young, I went to a very Christian school, and one of my really good friends used to call me the Christian breaker, because all these Christian boys, he was like, no, I'm not waiting for sex to marriage. I'd be like, are you now?
Yeah, you're like, now 2 weeks after me.
And I was just like, I love popping cherries. I had taken so many Christian boys virginity by the time I was 18.
Oh, the Catholic boys are the best.
Yeah.
You guys are the best.
I definitely was very much into that. Until this day now, like, when I see anybody new, and I was like, oh, so what haven't you done? And they're like, oh, well, I've done this, but I haven't done these things, and I'm scared of this. And then I'm like, really now? Well,
what are you scared of again?
What are you scared of? Why are you scared of it? And we will get to questions later. That's nothing.
Anybody can do that.
You know how much I love force feeding people their cum and other people's cum? Like, I love forcing men to eat their cum and other people's
I taste my own cum all the time. I feel like it's normal. It's like, how's it going down there? Need to eat more yogurt.
Women do that a lot. You have to check. You have to. So there's a lot of times where you're just like down and you're like, oh, good today.
Good.
You know, it's like checking the weather. You're just kind of like, first thing you do in the morning before you go out, you got to make sure.
Yes.
But course, come eating. Yeah, I actually make my partner come into a bunch of condoms all the time so that I can tie them up, put them in the freezer, and then have a collection of it so that I can use it as training material for my sissy slut or punishment material for those who don't obey me, and just because of me.
Just because you can.
Yeah, just because you can.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's part of your medicine in a doctor role play, and that's the medicine you have to take.
Yes. Oh, I love
Right?
that.
Okay, so I'm gonna actually, because we don't actually have much time left, I'm going to let people ask questions before I ask you any more questions. If you have any questions out there, feel free to ask them. If you're on Instagram Live, we may not be able to read them. So for those of you asking questions on Periscope, you know, bombs away.
Go for it.
But I do want to ask, like, do you feel that, you know, we're seeing this popularity of witchcraft, which we've spoken about before.
Yeah.
We're always seeing a popularity of BDSM and kink, and more information about sex work too. A lot more shows about sex work that are going into the media and people talking about it. And of course, there's like Cardi B, who is a stripper, and like all that stuff. So how do you feel the future of like each of them, both of them, like those arenas?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked me this. So the biggest thought I have on like the recent witch revival craze, so I joined my first coven when I was 16. I was super lucky to have an amazing community, and back then I was like, I'm here because of the craft. And they were like, that movie is not an accurate representation of witchcraft.
It's not, but it was good.
Exactly. I was like, whatever. And so even then I was like, however people come to the craft, I'm pretty chill about. However, the only thing I've really noticed is, for me, witchcraft has always been very gender, like all genders were allowed. My coven had men. A lot of my witch mentors have been men and women, and also trans people too. And so it's kind of like what I see in the current incarnation of the witch craze is that it's very female focused, very queer focused, which is fine and awesome and like definitely about time, but like it's also just kind of a bummer to me because I really want men to be able to have access to what I've learned and what I've been able to really heal myself through. So everything kind of comes and goes in waves, and it's like we kind of talked about like 50 Shades of Grey with the kink community, and all of a sudden now everybody's like a little submissive that wants to try this, but it's like, so that's one thing I think it will kind of shift back eventually, but so I'm definitely a huge fan of men exploring witchcraft as well.
Somebody had asked, which I think we need a little clarifying on the question, was how do you tell a long life partner that sex is more mental for you?
Oh.
Yeah, so, and then it was, maybe someone said gradually, ? So, mental meaning in what capacity that you need like mental stimulation, because most people do, especially as you get older and your body fails you and your body doesn't react all the way. Like, so let's say you are a cis male and you know are used to like having an erection immediately when you think about something erotic. That's not always going to happen. You're going to need a lot more stimulation, whether that's mental, physical, and in general that doesn't happen with women. You know, women need, like I was reading an article that said women need on average, from the study they did, 20 minutes to get fully turned on.
Actually, I like hearing that, because even with like in vibrator culture, I feel like I can get myself off in 5 minutes and then like expect that to also happen in sex. And so it's good to hear that it's like, just take your time, guys.
Yeah, because I think the difference with masturbating is you've actually have done that build up mentally, because before you get to the point where you actually want to masturbate, you've kind of been thinking, and
that's true. Okay.
You yourself, that little energy level has been going up, and then you get to the point like, oh, I can masturbate. So then you masturbate, and of course you can do it really quickly because you've been kind of thinking about it in your head. But if a sexual interaction with you and somebody else where that wasn't maybe in your head, you need like women need on average 20 minutes to like get to the point of really being turned on.
Yeah.
And I see that with myself. Like, even if I want to have sex, I still need this, like, I need the foreplay, I need the mental stimulation, I need the role play sometimes, I need a few things going on to really get me going. And then from that point, that's when we can like start stuff, and then it may be however longer before I actually have an orgasm.
Yeah, and especially with translating fantasies into real life, because this is a question I get asked a lot, because it's like, I'm very open about being into taboo sexual stuff, and people are like, well, how can I get my partner to be into that? And so for me, like, it definitely helps. I would say self-awareness when it comes to sexuality is one of the most important parts. Like, knowing what turns you on, and sometimes you learn that through trial and error, but knowing what turns you on and being able to speak about it confidently. If your partner loves you and they genuinely want to get you off, like, and you can even like pepper it in with just kind of like, I know it's pretty weird, but like, this is what I like. And like, my partner is so incredible because I was able to just be like, hey, I'm into incest. I'm going to ask you to be my dad. I'm going to ask you to be my brother. Sometimes I'm a little girl. Sometimes you're the doctor. Sometimes it's this. And he's like, okay, that was a lot, but like, sure, I can do that. And it's because I have that self-awareness and the vocabulary to be able to build up to it. And like, the medical fetish, for example, is like, what I like about that is feeling exposed. And vulnerable. So it's not even necessarily him being the doctor. Like, he doesn't always even have to go way overboard with the role play. It's like, as long as I feel like I'm being inspected and exposed, then he knows those key words to really be able to create. And we've been able to create some really amazing scenes just because of those two words.
So I guess there's two people who asked this very similar question about telling your partner, your long-term partner, that you're into kink. So yes, I would say telling your partner that you're into kink, that you've been with for a while, can be a bit tricky in the sense that, keep in mind that because you're into it, you've been thinking about it for a long time. So your journey with understanding the fact that you're into certain kinks or you have certain fetish is a longer journey and a longer conversation you've been having with yourself.
Yes, yeah.
While your partner is just starting off of that. So you have to be a little patient with their understanding, because you've been thinking about it, researching, looking, getting off to it, and they didn't even have it in their atmosphere at all. So when you start off with having, I find that start off having like a very innocent, conversation about like your guys' current sex life sometimes, about, is there anything they want to try that maybe you guys haven't tried before? Is there any ways, is there any things that, any fantasies that they have? And you keep it open-ended so that it's not like, hey, I'm into you putting your fist in my ass. And they're like, what the fuck?
Whoa, yeah, exactly. It's like, definitely baby steps. Like, build up to it. And also, shit, I forgot what I was going to say. Keep going.
And so that kind of having that very open-ended question of seeing where they're into and what they might want and what they might want to try is a big one too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and also, if you're a bottom, even if you're a bottom in this fantasy, like, be prepared to teach them how to do it. Like, be prepared to say, okay, even though these are the kind of things that I would like you to do to me, like, I know a lot of, femmes and women's in particular can be like, well, if I have to teach him how to do it, like, doesn't that ruin the fantasy? And it's like, well, yeah, like, that one time it does, but, like, you have to be able to teach someone your language and the language of the fantasy in order to really be able to receive it.
Someone said telling her friends, well, I think that lays into a bigger problem about your guys' communication. If you're talking to her about something and you've actually expressed to her that, this is very hard for you to communicate and you're still wrapping your head around it, and she disrespects your guys' communication by telling other people, that has to do with you guys needing to fix your communication. And I recommend couples therapy at that point. And a lot of times, some people, I recommend just going to couples therapy to get to the point where you can actually open up about your kinks and your fetish. You know, it is not an easy conversation, and you do have to keep in mind that they may not accept it.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
The reality is not everybody is open-minded. Not everybody's going to accept it, and you have to be open to the fact that they may not accept it. And what type of solutions do you think could happen? Are you okay with the fact that they're not going to accept it, but you guys can still have your relationship in your marriage? Are you, you know, is the solution possibly that they may, you know, allow you to get it somewhere else? You know? So there's just a combination of, there's no one right way. And there's no one right way to have this conversation. It is, in general, not an easy conversation when you're bringing up a sensitive thing like sex in general in a society where people don't really want to talk about it, you know, and talk about intimacy. And so, you know, and going to therapy yourself, you know, on your own, just going to therapy on your own to talk about your understanding of your own sexuality so that you get a better way of saying it, you have a better language, can help you then get to the point of finally expressing it to them. So, but the reality is not everyone's going to accept it. You know, like, I've been in many relationships that have not been accepting of my kinks, of my fetish, of my job, of, you know, a lot of aspects of who I am. And it took me meeting many different types of people, me getting to a better understanding of my own sexuality, and also knowing how to communicate it to somebody else. And then also meeting people that are part of a community that I think...
And that will be aligned with that.
So there's so many factors, wouldn't you say? And that's hard. It is really hard, and there's no, like, single solution, and sometimes there is no solution.
I will say my biggest part was I would meet guys or women that were kind of kinky, so I would be like, oh, that means they're a little kinky, like, they'll be into all this other, and most of them weren't. Like, you're not, it's really tough when people do put down that boundary of, like, hey, I'm not really into this, I don't think I'm ever going to be into it. It's pretty tough to try to change that.
And you have to respect that, you know, because it's their boundaries. You have to respect that. But you have to, you know, talk to each other, and there may be some solution that you guys can come up with. And unfortunately, I've known people who've come to terms with their kinks and their fetish and their stuff, and then had to end relationships. If I may ask, is there a way to be away from kinks to conform with the majority tribe but not working? Do you mean to get rid of your kinks? Again, I would go to therapy and figure out whether it is a kink or whether it's some other thing or whatever, and talk to someone about it.
And a lot of, for me, it's just all been about accepting these parts of myself. Like, I punished myself for so long about being into weird shit, and I feel like a lot of us go through that stage, and at the point where I finally was like, hey, you know what, this is who I am, and this is what I'm bringing to the world, and, like, I'm only going to attract people that align with me. Like, all of a sudden, now my entire life is filled with those people.
I made that choice too, that I wasn't going to be around or put up with people who were going to judge me. And now my life is filled with those types of people.
Like you.
And willingness to have that conversation, just to say and put it out there right away. That it is very hard, and I'm not going to say it's an easy task. It is definitely a hard task, but it took many years for me to finally just be like, hey, I'm a sex worker. Hey, I'm a dominatrix. Hey, I'm kinky. Hey, I'm these things. You know, and it was hard. I had my own shame around a lot of it for a while, and I slowly, like, would be more open about saying one thing, and then I was like, okay, I tackled that, and I'm going to start saying this thing, and then
baby steps.
So it takes all baby steps, and it's definitely a journey of self-realization. that takes support in different ways. It is not something that you're always on your own about. You don't have to be in a world we do have therapists and counselors, and we have programs like this where you can have this conversation, see that there are other people
supported.
like you. The internet has a lot of bad things, but it also has a lot of really amazing things. So, and that's the great thing, is that you have a lot of community, and can get a lot of community. Okay, so we have run over, so we won't be answering any more questions, but I do want to know, if you can put it out there, of how people can contact you or follow you, and if there's any upcoming projects or things that you want to promote.
Cool. So you can find me on Instagram at exlibris, so it's EX_LIBRIS__. I really like Latin words for some reason. So that's my Instagram. That's the best way to get in touch with me and keep up to date on what's going on. I'm still really kind of structuring everything at this point, but I have plans to write a book within the next 2 years, and that's kind of my new pet project. I also do a lot of promotion work for the NSFW parties, and I do workshops there, and they are at weareNSFW.com, or sorry, at weareNSFW, and I do a lot of workshops with them, so you'll probably see me around at their parties as well. And I also love, I love interacting with you guys too, so if anything resonated during this podcast, please drop me a line, let me know, and we can talk.
Well, thank you, Lenore, for being on the show. Thank you guys for tuning in. Next week it will be Martine Phoenix as our guest, so please tune in because Martine is awesome. And Dia Dynasty will be doing the interview. Is there any BDSM events today? It is in my last day. And you can check the La Maison de Rouge calendar. We do post events on the LaMaisonDeRouge.com calendar of all the events that are going on today in New York City that are BDSM and kink related. So thank you guys all for joining again, and we will talk soon.
Oh, and the Instagram one more time is at EX_LIBRIS_.
Perfect.